War is cool. Not like real war. Virtual war. War is arguably the most popular backdrop for video games, whether that's a historically accurate war like World War II in the first Call of Duty, or a fictional war like the Covenant War in Halo. But out of all these games that focus on war, there's a smaller subsect of games called military simulators or Milsims. These are your squads, your armas, your hell let looses, but Milsims don't just have to be first-person shooters. They can also be something like Broken Arrow, which is a real-time strategy game, but uses realistic values for things like tanks and aircraft. No matter what type of game the Milsim is, the developers always want to do one thing, and that's immerse the player to make them believe that they are in a realistic conflict. To do this, you might see things like photorealistic graphics, or maybe there's a realistically short time to kill. Maybe the maps are realistically large. Maybe the vehicles don't just need one player, but you need teamwork and multiple people to operate them. And maybe there are certain visual or audio cues that happen on screen to make the player fear for their virtual life. Now, you could pick any one of these games, say that they were realistic, and most people would probably agree with you, but I don't. These games all get one huge thing wrong. It's the weather. Now, I want you to think about World War II and the invasion of Normandy on D-Day, and if you're a Milsim enjoyer, then you've probably seen all the episodes of World War II in color, and you more than likely paid attention in history class, so we're going to test your knowledge. We all know that the invasion happened on June 6, 1944, but did you know that it was supposed to happen on June 5th, 1944? In the days leading up to the invasion, British meteorologists actually forecasted that there would be a huge storm starting on June 5th, but there would be a small break in the weather on June 6th. In order for the invasion to take place, you needed to have low tide for the landing craft, but also, preferably, clear skies for the paratroopers so they could land on the right target. Now, the weather was obviously not perfect on June 6th, but as we all know now, it was good enough for the invasion to move forward. Weather is extremely important for militaries in the real world. It can make or break an operation, but when it comes to video games, nobody really gets it right. Let's start with rain. Apart from the obvious clear and sunny skies, rain is one of the more common weather conditions found in Milsims, and it allows you to do things a little differently. Maybe you're able to take a more direct route to an objective because the rain obscures your vision, or maybe you're able to move a little bit quicker because the rain coming down is actually masking your footsteps. Now, I'm not saying that this rain doesn't do something. Obviously, players are reacting to the weather and playing a little bit differently, but this is all superficial. When rain actually comes down, water is falling and landing on the earth, and that water has to go somewhere.
When it rains, unsurprisingly, you're gonna find giant piles of mud. This stuff is gross. It can block entire areas, and if I have to get to the other side, I now have to make a decision. Do I go around? It could take longer, but I'll be clean. Do I go through? Well, it might be quicker, but I'll be coated in this mud. And that kind of sucks.
But we don't ever see this in video games, and if we do, it just kind of sits here. Just kind of stare at it, and it looks cool and might sound a little squishy, but does it ever actually do anything to you? This is from Battlefield 1, and I'm not saying that Battlefield 1 is a Milsim or ever should be a Milsim, but this map in particular is called Passchendaele. And Passchendaele is a battle from World War I, also known as the Third Battle of Ypres, and this battle is infamous for the deadly, deadly mud. Not only was this area of Belgium usually wet, it is the lowlands of course, but August of 1917 was unusually rainy. There were only 3 days in the entire month where it didn't rain. And when you pair that with an artillery bombardment from the British trying to break through the German lines, and this artillery bombardment lasted 3 weeks and they fired over 5 million shells, that means that this entire place turned from relatively decent farming land into an absolute crazy mud pit. You know how back when you were little and you might watch Cartoon Network and someone would get stuck in quicksand, sink all the way down, then get pulled up? Well, you don't really get pulled up when you're on a battlefield. The most gruesome part about mud in the Battle of Ypres is that soldiers, and this isn't just one account, multiple accounts of watching other soldiers drown in mud. And these soldiers who were drowning would actually ask their friends to put them out of their misery so they wouldn't have to go that way. Mud is deadly. Now, I know what you're thinking. Dude, I do not want to play a video game where I can literally step out and drown in mud. At Arma, it takes me like 5 minutes to get to the front line, and that's if my vehicle doesn't hit a tiny little pebble and explode on the way there. I get that, but what if the game just had mud? Well, let me introduce you to a little game called Foxhole. Foxhole is a 24/7 persistent war game where everything is made by the players and wars can take days, weeks, or usually months. Foxhole is the most realistic war simulator, not because it has realistic armor penetration values for tanks, or because you need to tourniquet someone and then take them out with an ambulance in order to save them. That doesn't really matter. In Foxhole, the war feels like a war, like the actual slow grind of a war. Not only do you need frontline soldiers, you also need people way in the back line here to manufacture your war materials and transport them all the way down so those frontline soldiers can actually use them. Frontlines can grind to a halt because artillery has leveled everything and created a massive cratered wasteland. Entire regions can be encircled and cut off from logistics, slowly bleeding them dry until they're down to nothing and are overrun and killed. This is what's known as a salvage field. Here, players gather salvage, then take this salvage and submit it to a refinery where they process into basic materials. Once they get basic materials, they then grab these basic materials and submit them to a factory where they can create weapons, equipment, and ammunition. But if you don't want any weapons, equipment, or ammunition, you can simply take these basic materials and drive them to the front line to build defenses. But either way, whether it's equipment, weapons, ammunition, defenses, the entire war effort revolves around this constant loop of salvage, refinement, and basic materials. Now, this entire process is time-consuming. War is time-consuming, and if one thing is delayed along this entire process, whether that's gathering the salvage, submitting them into the factory, or delivering, one enemy attack on the front line can time perfectly with a missed shipment to shatter defenses and blow a hole right through the front and completely change the course of a war. This balancing act between frontline combat and logistics is where weather comes into play. In Foxhole, if it's raining, it obviously looks like it's raining, but not only does it visually show rain on the screen, but you'll slowly start to see water accumulate on the ground. These puddles start fairly small, but as it continues to rain and more water falls, we can see the puddles get larger, and all this water will eventually create huge patches of flooded ground. And this is where Foxhole differs from pretty much every single game, not even just including Milsims. Now, I want to make something clear. I'm not just talking about water. Water is obviously common in video games, and if we take Squad, for instance, we have plenty of terrain features that have water, lakes, rivers, whatever it is, and infantry, you have to cross it sometimes. You might be slowed down, you might see some splashing. Terrain features are common, but we never really have to think about how the world is going to change around us in these games. This water is always going to be there. We always know it. That hill is always going to be a hill. This trench is always going to be a trench. But that's where Foxhole differs. How is the world going to change around us, and how does that change make us play differently? Now, as we know from the Battle of Passchendaele, mud can be deadly. And if you're seeing all these puddles and you're thinking, okay, you're saying that I'm going to walk through this puddle, sink, and drown? That doesn't sound very fun. And that wouldn't be fun. So instead, Foxhole takes the other realistic properties of mud and uses that to challenge the player. As you run through the puddles, you will begin to get muddy, and as you get muddy, you will get slower. This could start as a small movement penalty as you quick dash across a tiny puddle, but if you're forced to run across large patches of muddy ground, you can quickly become overwhelmed with mud, slowing your sprint speed down to a crawl. Now, this is a non-mud covered battlefield. As you can see, players can run around, they can zip to a flank, jump into a trench. The only thing restricting movement is the enemy. The moment it starts raining, however, we have to react to how the world changes. Do I now have to push across a muddy field, which is more direct, but I am more vulnerable since I'll be moving slow? Or do I need to take a less direct flank, but I'm going to be safer if I run into the enemy? These are the things that can completely change a battlefield, which can then change a battle and even an entire front. Now, to give a more concrete example of how this can really turn the tide, here I have an anti-tank kit. I have an anti-tank launcher as well as anti-tank rounds in my inventory. It's already really heavy, and that means I'm already moving slow. But in order to get to the front line, I have to trudge through all these puddles and get covered in mud. If one lone infantry ambushes me, I'm pretty much dead. I can't quickly get into cover. And this is what's so important. If I lose this anti-tank kit, I don't just spawn in with a new one. That one anti-tank kit was physically delivered by someone to the front line. If the enemy kills me, they can take it, and that's gone. If you lose enough equipment over the course of a muddy battle, you can really not have the tools to deal with the enemy, and the front line can crack. And on top of this, puddles don't just form on the ground. Water goes everywhere, right? And these trenches, which are normally a force multiplier for infantry, can instead turn into flooded, muddy death traps. Alright, I know what you're thinking now. Moi, this seems great. You're telling me there's something that happens in-game that covers me in mud, slows me down, and ultimately kills me. There's nothing I can do about it, and that's just what my life is if I'm on a front line when it's raining. If you want to remove mud, you just have to simply run across ground that isn't covered in puddles. That could be grass, that could be road, or that could be a tier 2 trench. This trench here is covered in wooden planks, and engineers can actually use basic materials, which we talked about earlier, to upgrade a dirt trench into a wooden plank trench. There are certain things you can do on the battlefield to respond to the situation around you, and although you might not normally want to spend the time to dig a trench and then upgrade it to wooden planks, this might be a worthy investment so that way your infantry is far more effective on the front line. These are the really cool, tiny decisions that every player can make to really turn the course of a battle. Oh, and if you want to build any type of defenses, you can't really do it if it's on flooded ground. So you got to use a shovel or a bucket. You got to clear out the water, and then you can start building your bunkers, your pillboxes, your trenches, whatever. It makes sense, but if people aren't thinking about the water as something they can interact with, it can really change a front line. But this is just infantry. Vehicles can also get covered in mud, and if we take this tank, for example, that can kind of change the dynamic of a tank battle. This is an outlaw, one of the fastest tanks in the game, but if it's covered in mud, it's going to be slower. You're removing that one advantage because of the world and you choosing to run through puddles or not cleaning it off. You can use buckets or hoses to wash off vehicles, and although it might seem a little silly to see a car wash pop up on the front line, the players who do this and take the time to deal with the elements are going to be much more effective. The entire battle can change because one or two people are deciding to clear out puddles and wash vehicles. Their tanks are going to be quicker, and their logistics trucks are going to be quicker, which means supplies are going to be delivered just a minute or two faster than the other side. The entire battle in Foxhole is a balancing act between both sides. And not just the enemy against the enemy, it's a balancing act between the infantry, your tanks, your logistics, and your backline production. But rain and mud is just the tip of the weather iceberg. Now, I'm sure most of you guys, even if you haven't played DayZ, you've probably heard of DayZ. And when DayZ first came out, the actual biggest, #1 most dangerous killer in DayZ was not players. It wasn't zombies. It was actually the weather. Freezing to death was one of the biggest killers. Now, although drowning in mud is obviously a little lesser known way to die in combat, freezing to death is probably a little more expected. If you're out battling in the elements and it's cold, you kind of expect that unfortunately you're going to have some cold weather casualties. In World War II in the Battle of Stalingrad, there were over 100,000 casualties for the Germans. That includes combat, but also starvation and freezing. Yes, plenty of soldiers were unfortunately found just frozen to death. which is another really gruesome way to die. But if you were to play Hell Let Loose and play the Battle of Stalingrad, you don't have to worry about the cold at all. You're running around in not the best cold weather gear, but it's just a backdrop. It's just a setting. It's changing green and brown into white and gray. In Foxhole, however, the weather will absolutely kill you. Just like in the real world, you can have a couple different options of snowy days. It can be simply snowy and snow falls and it's kind of nice and it's chilly and yay, snow. Or you can have an all-out blizzard, a crazy snowstorm where you lose visibility and you can freeze to death in a matter of minutes. In Foxhole, infantry can also freeze to death in a matter of minutes. You can have these large facilities that were producing things like heavy oil, petroleum. This entire process can grind to a halt as all this liquid actually turns to sludge in the pipes. And on top of that, you can have entire shipping lanes closed down as the waterways freeze over. Players need to spend extra resources to make and deliver cold weather gear like parkas, which will allow the infantry to stay out in the elements longer. But soldiers can also throw together things like fire pits or even build hearths to stay warm. And ultimately, in battle, the ones who stay warm longer have a better shot at winning the firefight. Now, this weather is going to do a lot more than just kill infantry players. It can really strain logistics lines. A front line that now has a bunch of snow is not only going to be using that cold weather gear like parkas, but they're going to be using a lot more diesel than normal. Every time a fire pit or hearth burns, that's one less can of diesel that a vehicle can use. If you don't up your production of diesel, the entire front can run dry. You now have infantry freezing because they have no fires, and you have vehicles that can't run because there's no fuel. But also in the back line, as everyone's using so much power and fuel, if you don't spend resources to insulate your pipes, as we mentioned before, their pipes will literally freeze in place and production will all stop. The entire front line can simply be strangled to death with no supplies when everything freezes. And have you heard of Ice Road Truckers? It's a documentary on the History Channel that follows truckers who drive on literal ice roads. These roads, normally throughout most of the year, are just water. But certain months with certain weather conditions actually allow hard enough freezes to allow these giant big rigs to deliver material. This type of stuff can happen in Foxhole too. It can open up entirely new routes for not just transport vehicles. You can actually now do certain combat operations across the ice floes as well. It's really cool, it's really unique, and once again, it shows how the world can change, and you can just sit back and say, yeah, that sucks, or you can try to take advantage of it. But before we go any further, let's time out here for a second, because I know you're saying to yourself, all right, so you want me to play a video game where I slow down and die when I'm muddy, I can't build when it rains, and I'm going to freeze to death when it snows. This seems miserable. Now, if you know anything about the military, part of basic training is to break you down and build you up as a soldier that the military wants, right? But one aspect of it is the shared suck. You grow together as a unit, as a squad, as a whatever, and you're battle buddies and you share the same horrible experience, and that creates bonds. Foxhole, strangely enough, does that, more so than any other game that I've ever experienced. If you go through a battle, through rain, through mud, through snow, through blizzards, and you come out the other side with the same people, you're going to remember that years later. You're going to have special gaming bonds with friends that you never knew possible. And it sounds cheesy. And if I didn't experience it, I'd probably just nod my head and say, yeah, whatever. But years later, I still remember those battles of absolute suck, that it really feels like a real war that you have to just withstand. 22-hour gaming sessions of surviving artillery in blizzard conditions only for a break in the weather to show, and then we go on an epic counterattack and take a bunker or a town or a relic back. It's so cool. And this is what I love about Foxhole. Yeah, the cold is going to be the same for everyone. The wet is going to be the same for everyone. But players are always going to be able to do what they want with these conditions. It's really a sandbox, and the game itself is fully player driven. That means that some players may actually be able to get an edge out on the others, all because they're adapting to their situation better. A perfect example of this is the weather station. Yeah, you can actually build a weather station in Foxhole. You can LARP as a weatherman. And you know how we were talking about in World War II, how those British meteorologists predicted a huge storm which delayed the Normandy invasion? Well, you can play just as an important role as those meteorologists did in World War II in Foxhole. But there's a big catch. Nobody really knows how these things work. So the Foxhole devs do something that I don't really see in video games. They add something to the game and they don't really explain it to the players. They will add something like a weather station and might tell them how to build it, what materials required, how long, and all that type of stuff. But then they're just gonna see what the players do with it. And right now, only one side really knows what to do. So Wardens and Colonials are at constant war with themselves. Every war, it's 30, 40, 50 days of blue versus green. So not just having an equipment advantage is going to help you in the war, but having a knowledge advantage is going to help you. If Colonials know how weather stations work and how they can predict the weather and better plan operations, that's going to be hugely beneficial to them, while Wardens are left in the dark, literally. So in War 122, Colonials spent however many resources and time and energy to build 14 weather stations across all of their regions. And the going theory is that you triangulate the signals for the weather stations and you can actually find a storm's eye. The eye of the storm will show up on the map and you can now track the system. But that's just a theory. I don't know that because I'm Warden, and Colonials will obviously not want to share that information. Now, part of the reason the Colonials are even more tight-lipped about this information than maybe past wars is that later this year, the developers are adding airplanes to the game. There's going to be an air update, and if one side knows the weather and can predict rain, snowstorms, wind direction, and how strong the wind is, they can plan much more successful air raids. You're going to have fighters, you're going to have bombers, and you're going to have paratroopers. Colonials have a massive advantage right now. If you want to compare this to the real world, almost everyone knows Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the two cities which were destroyed by the atomic bombs in World War II. But do you know of Kokura? Kokura was the actual target, but it was full of cloud cover. The bombers couldn't figure out where it was, so they redirected to Nagasaki. If the Colonials can actually use this weather station to predict the weather, they will now be able to plan certain different targets and have primary targets, secondary targets. They will be absolutely deadly in the skies, while Wardens will be in the dark, trying to just figure out where to go, and they might be stuck with cloud cover and no actual targets. I love Milsims. They scratch the itch that I have for blowing stuff up, but they also give you that aspect of taking a step back, slowing things down, and thinking strategically or tactically about a situation. Yeah, you can be fast in a Milsim. You can do some CQB in an urban environment, clear a room, rush to a vehicle and try to blow it up. But oftentimes you are rewarded for being a little bit slower and thinking through the situation at hand. And Foxhole adds this in a way that I've never seen in any other game. If you want to play a war, if you want to actually feel how a war is supposed to feel, then Foxhole is the game that you should play. It isn't always rewarding in the moment. You can be in a trench and 12 hours later you could have gained 0 ground. But you're doing it with friends and buddies that you make in that trench. It's not rewarding at the moment, but 12 hours later you can say, hey, I prevented the enemy from taking this trench. It's slow, but also fast, and things can change in an instant. It's a war, and if you get sick of the front line, go travel in the back line and see how the war machine really operates. See how they react to things like weather, to fuel shortages, to resource scarcity. This is what a Milsim, I feel like, really should be. And yes, we might not have games that have the scale of a war, like Foxhole. Squad is 40 minutes, Arma can just be 8 hours or so. But if they can take an aspect of the world changing and make it just like Foxhole, I think that would make for a far more enjoyable and dynamic game. I'm not just talking about a dynamic skybox. Yes, it's cool when it goes from sunny to nighttime, but give us something to interact with. Make it hard to get through wet, muddy puddles. Make us freeze a little bit and have to change how we move around. Maybe we now have to jump into an APC to stay warm and transport that way. These are the type of things that can really elevate and escalate Milsims into a really, really unique gaming experience. War isn't cool, and every other game makes it seem cool. It makes you seem like a hero. It makes you seem bigger than maybe you really are. Foxhole is the only game that can make you feel so little, that can force you to run across a muddy field and have you get cut down because you just can't move quick enough, or have you huddled in a trench and freeze to death next to someone because that guy has a parka and you don't. Milsims should aim to recreate war in some way, and Foxhole is the only one that actually makes war feel as bad as it really is.